Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm the CEO of Dynamic Boards, and today I've got Paul Elliott with me. Paul was the first black captain at Chelsea Football Club on the field, and he's now chair of the FA Inclusion Advisory Board. He's on the FA Council, and he's representing the FA Inclusion Advisory Board on the FA board. Lots of us have a sense of kind of inclusion diversity on the pitch. We've heard a lot about that over the last year, but off the pitch and in the leadership side, we probably don't know as much about that. So Paul, I'd love to hear, like, from your perspective, how's that journey been from the pitch to the boardroom?
I think, in truth, on reflection, it's been a fascinating journey, but one I probably didn't appreciate while I was in the journey itself, because, you know, when I'm being a player, when I was a player, a captain, a leader, you're focused on mobilizing your players, playing to the best of your ability, leading, effectively being the manager's coach on the field of play. Thereafter, on the transitioning into the boardroom, it's a completely different set of skill sets where you can bring certain characteristics in terms of your presence, your authority, your leadership, but also there's a complete new transition in terms of education, understanding about the different skill sets, educating yourself, which is what I've done, and really understanding about boards and to be an effective board member, because it doesn't just become about you and your personal performance. And I used to utilize that. I always believed being the hardest thing as a captain was, you know, you've got to inspire the collective, but also focus on your own personal performance as well. So it's a bit of it was challenging at times, but it was a situation that I thoroughly enjoyed. But the transition from the boardroom has been extremely interesting. It's been something that has taught me new skill sets about understanding people, understanding body language, understand the dynamic of the board, you know, understanding to respect other people's opinions, albeit you may not necessarily agree with them. It's about capturing what I call that diversity of thought, diversity of thinking, because I think that's been such a powerful evolution that I've seen within the FA board and the FA other boards and committees within the organisation over the last 4 or 5 years.
That's great, Paul. And it's brilliant that you've made that transition, because then other people can see that and do that too. So I know you were the first black captain of a Premier League club. And I guess there's a lot of people that might be watching this that are thinking about they might be the first of some sort in joining a particular board. What's it like been like for you, being like the pioneer, being like the one that goes first?
It's interesting, because when I set out to play, my consideration was not to be the first at anything. I just wanted to enjoy a successful career and be as successful as I can on the field of play. Make a difference, of course. And also I thought more about legacy, and I think that evolved more as I got older. But I suppose it wasn't until, it was for many years after when I stopped playing, I wasn't aware that I was Chelsea's first black captain or the first black captain in the Premier League. It was just brought to my attention through sort of third parties when, for example, they were looking at, you know, Black History Month and looking at the celebration of diversity, the celebration of Black and Asian and ethnic minority players' achievements within football. So obviously that was the catalyst to activate, third parties' consciousness to do a bit of a deep dive and actually say, well, you know, who was the first? Why was the first? What was the climate at the time? Were you aware you were the first? So I suppose that because of, I think a lot of that was the sort of catalyst around the early 90s when I co-founded the Kick It Out organisation, which for me was a real big game changer for players of my generation because of the challenges and the discrimination and acute racism we had on the field of play. So that was a real game changer, shall we say, in ex-players' parlance, to bring the awareness not just of diversity, but also of the challenges of racism, discrimination, prejudice, inequalities within football and sport. So it was a situation that all the various firsts, you know, as I evolved in my, you know, governance area of my work, many people said, Paul, did you realise this? Did you realise you were the first black black English player to play in Italy, the first black ex-player to sit on the FA Council or the FA Board. I says, I had no idea, because, you know, all I've tried to be my whole life has been a change agent, and that's focusing on challenging, that's focusing on breaking down barriers, breaking down institutional barriers, breaking down those structural, systemic and systematic challenges and barriers that were in football. And thereafter, basically be a change agent, make a positive contribution, because like on the field of play, I felt good when I lead. I felt good when I've influenced people, got the best out of my colleagues, and we got the desired outcome. And I've taken that same template and principles into my work in governance and in the boardroom.
That's amazing. And I think it's kind of refreshing that while it was happening, you didn't feel the pressure of knowing you were first. you were cracking on with the job at hand.
Well, my point is, I'm probably glad I wasn't aware, because I think that brings an additional pressure and additional intensity and scrutiny that you don't really need, because, you know, the climate, you know, that I played in was a very, very challenging one, you know, for black players in the early 80s, and the challenges of racism, as most people will understand. You know, football mirrored society then. And that juncture in society, you had the National Front, the British National Party. You know, there was such a significant presence in stadiums, you know, throwing bananas at players like myself, monkey chanting, booing, distribution of their, you know, their paraphernalia out to people. So, you know, you just had to focus on the job in hand and be the best that you can be, and just accept, you know, this is where we are. This is the environment that I'm playing in. I'm going to do my best to serve for myself, but by doing best for yourself, you are contributing to the team's performance, and obviously doing what's right for my family too.
And Paul, that was where you were, and now where we are now. Like, what do you see in inclusion and diversity in sport generally, particularly looking at off the pitch? Now that you've got a really good insight into that. You know, the boards that we have in football around the country, lower level, also Premier League, also in the FA, have you seen that shift? Is there a long way to go?
If I'll be totally honest and transparent, there is a long way to go, but there's been a formal acknowledgement. I think if we look at the last 18 months, if we look at look at COVID-19 and the ramifications and the impact it's had on the world. Also, I've looked at many sort of top-class current international players have really spoken out in a way that, you know, I really sort of foster great pride, you know, great belief in the way that these players like Raheem Sterling, Tyrone Mings, Nikita Paris, these are all great players, men and women, black and white, male and female. You know, on the back of COVID, I think what it's done, and the Black Lives Matter movement, is brought this unification, you know, and it's spoken about diversity, the lack of diversity. And actually it sort of starts challenging football, challenging football's stakeholders, challenging the boards, the councils, the committees within football, and actually saying, on the field of play, we've got 35% of the players who are black. Why is that not represented in the structures? Why is that not representative in coaching? Why is that not represented in senior leadership, middle management, extended leadership teams? So what it done, as a consequence of the most extreme adversity that we've lived through, it brought out all the issues about systemic, structural, institutional, systematic racism and social inequality and racial inequality. And as a consequence of that, the byproduct of that was you had so many influencers in football using their social platforms to say, why aren't we more diverse? Look at this movement of Black Lives Matter. It was no longer just black people for a cause. It was young people, it was mature people, it was people from all different races and backgrounds and colours and creeds. So that's what we call diversity. So I thought that was the catalyst and the change that was happening globally in society, that football now had to stand up and wake up and say, we have to change, we need to change. And the Football Association, I think in total honesty, there'd been some good work going on in the organisation, but really in little silos. It wasn't necessarily in a joined up, cogent, cohesive way that held the organisation to account. So I think it was a real catalyst of change and a learning curve for everybody, and a start of a journey, which we are now in that journey.
Yeah, and Paul, all this is relative. So for someone watching this, they might be considering joining the board of a really small local organisation, and being maybe the first Black person on that board, but being a change agent there. But for you, when you first, with your role as chair of the Inclusion and Inclusion Council for the FA, with that role, whenever you were first told, well, actually, we're going to want you to represent that on the FA board, and you walked into your FA board meeting, how did that feel at the beginning?
I suppose it was pride for me, because I think it was recognition of my journey, recognition of my achievement, and actually that football wanted to evolve, football wanted to change, but football needs leaders to help it to change. And I think that there's been a whole educational component to this as well. And I believe that football was in a position now that on the back of adversity, it was ready to embrace change. What football didn't know was how to do it. And it was about then bringing in the right people where they could share knowledge, share ideas, share best practice, and football actually started to listen. And I think that was a proud moment for me, where you could actually go into that environment and just be myself, and you were welcomed. You were welcomed because people valued what you'd done. They recognized that you'd done everything with earnest, with sincerity, and you wanted to make a positive contribution. So it was about football learning now to embrace change. The same change that we've embraced on the field of play, they wanted to now embrace that within the structures of the organisation, because it's so important that the football has to represent society. It has to represent communities. Football, if you think about the global game, in the Premier League, every week, 4.5 billion people watch the Premier League. That's almost 65% of the global population. The Premier League is shown in 195 countries. So where I'm coming from, the clubs, they're global brands. So that their organisation, their boards, councils, committees, working groups has to be representative of the world, of the participants, of the people that watch the game and play the game and embrace the game and enjoy the game. And I think that's where the real shift in mindset, attitudes, and now starting to be converted to behaviours is really starting to positively evolve.
And we talk about dynamic boards about we want to make UK boards the most dynamic in the world. And this is one area where I'm sure lots of people don't realise we've got global influence. We've got a lot of the Premier League clubs and their boards and their leadership structures and how that works. That's something that the world gets impacted by. So if the UK can be a leader on that, then we can be an example to others as well.
Yeah, and also as well, actually saying that, what's the benefits, the socio, the human, the economic upside of a diverse and inclusion board? Problem solving, increased profits, higher employee engagement, and obviously their global reputations are enhanced. So you've got all the economic and the human, but you've got the social argument as well. And I just think now, football now wants to change. It wants to change. And obviously the diversity code, I think, has been a real potential shift in attitudes and behaviours, and it's the start of a real meaningful journey.
Tell us about the diversity code, Paul. I know you were spearheading that. What change is it bringing?
Well, the diversity code really was born out of the adversity that we lived in. And what I realised was the FA back in sort of 3 or 4 years ago, they created their own equality, diversity and inclusion plan. It was called IPOP, In Pursuit of Progress. So that was really, when I spoke about, the FA, doing some good work previously, but had to be joined up across the whole of the organisation. Because the FA is a huge juggernaut. It's got over 1,000 staff. You've got Wembley, you've got St George's Park. It's massive. It's a huge organisation. So, there was little work going on in little silos, but what we needed was a cogent, coherent plan across the whole of the divisions that was led and really, endorsed by the very top, which obviously was the main board, the chairman and the board. So you've got the top coming down, bottom coming up. And obviously data became very important because we recognized where the underrepresentation was. So it was clear that gender and ethnicity were the two big problematic areas, within the organization. And, my considerations was this to say, look at what we've, gone through. We all know that, football is not mirroring society. This organization is not mirroring the participants of the game, nor representative enough of people in society, So, there was a positive shift where people said, okay, Paul, and also we were trying to be proactive to George Floyd, proactive to the Black Lives Matter, and actually saying, this is where we can, the FA has tended in the past to be more reactive than proactive. And we've got an outstanding CEO called Mark Bullenham, and we were speaking, and I says, Mark, on the back of listening to players, Raheem Sterling, Tyrone Mings, they're looking up, and the famous words from Raheem Sterling was, when I look up, I don't see people who look like me. That for me was an incredible, powerful statement. And I says, Mark, you know exactly what he means. So we've got the players on the field of play that look like him, but they're not in the supporter base. They're not in the boardroom. They're not in extended leadership. They're not in senior leadership teams, management teams, not enough coaching. So there was a high level of disproportionality and underrepresentation. So I said to Mark, if we're going to be serious about change, we've got to create a code that holds English football to account. But the FA has to lead as the national governing body. So long and short of it is, he gave me a clear mandate to join it up, create a corporate structure. And the key thing that was representative in that was diversity of thought, diversity of thinking. My main board had players, had coaches, had owners, had women, had media, had male, we had every single area of diversity that captured football was inclusive on the main board and all the subcommittees thereafter within the structure. And I think, it's been extremely effective. It's been welcomed by football. And where we've been to date is that, there's 20 clubs in the Premier League and they've all signed up to the diversity code. And basically it's about aspirational targets around ethnicity, gender, based on the local demographic, based on the national demographic, and based on the coaching demographic. So it's holding the game to account, providing their data, of the composition of their staff, providing equality, diversity, and inclusion plans, and they're allowing themselves to be measured. So I think that we've got all the top 20 Premier League clubs have signed up. The FA are applying this for their own organisation. The Premier League are too. The English Football League, we've got 35 clubs signed up. We've got increased improvement in recruitment. So we have, more transparency, more openness. And this comes from the inception of how, advertisements are written. Because a lot of people are very intimidated and think, the certain language that it's written in and a certain form, I can't do this job. But actually they can. So we want to create greater openness, greater transparency in the recruitment process, more diverse panels. So the decision-making process, the parties are making the decision, they are representative of what society and football looks like. And also building underneath that what we call positive action programs, because what you have to do is to feed into that pipeline of talent and that talent pool and keep building on that. So, obviously you've got your future-proofing yourself for the future. So there's a number of initiatives, and I have to say, I'm very proud of that, because I think it's not all of the answer, but it's like building a house. The most important thing when you build a house is the foundation. If you get the foundation right, that's what holds up the house, and you can have contemporary, you can have Georgian, you can have mock Tudor, you can have what you desire. And I feel that what we've done, Sarah, we've created a strong foundation, and I think I call it like a child. I've conceived it in my mind, I believe it, now we're going to go out and achieve it. And I think in the diversity code, it's not all of the answers, but it's the start of a real positive evolving process where football has acknowledged the underrepresentation of gender and ethnicity in football and want to go on this journey. And I think over the next 3, 5, 7, 10 years, we want to be in a position where we don't need targets. So it's just a pure meritocratic process. Everybody's picked on meritocracy and integrity. But, that's the journey. But it's something that I'm extremely proud of.
That's amazing to hear, Paul. And now coming back to what Raheem Sterling said, that statement of, when I look up, I don't see people like me. If someone's listening to this and they're thinking of applying for a board, and they look at that board, they think, I don't see people like me. What would your message be for them if they're considering applying for a board role in sport and in other fields as well? What's your message for them?
That's why you should be there. That's why you should apply, because he or she can be that role model, can be that person that's going to be representative of their community, can be that individual to empower, to mobilize, for people to look up to and say, you are there, so I can be there. And I think that's such an important message for me, because, we've seen all the merits of diversity and inclusion. And I just feel now we're in a position in the world now where, my dream, as I said, within the FA, is that, equality, diversity and inclusion, be that catalyst that's embedded, in football governance, in football administration, from grassroots to communities. It's that golden thread throughout the whole organisation, all the way to the boardroom. So that's got to be, using football as that force for good, but also to show other boards in other areas, albeit the charitable sector, the financial sector, all the other the corporate sector that's out there, the other sports as well. I think it's important now that other sports take that lead and also create that code as well, where you're holding, under the sports governance code, you're holding people to account, because I use a very important phrase: what gets measured gets done. And measurement is key, and you use measurement by data. And I think that, if we look at the 21st century and the evolution of technology, we've seen that it can be used in an adverse way. We've got a lot of the negative that's going out, but there's also a very positive way data can be used to hold people to account, to give information, to understand your local demographic, to understand some of the challenges and the blockages within organisations. So it creates that, that level of transparency and that information sharing, which I think is a very important part of governance, to be quite candid with you.
And Paul, when we look at sports boards and who's needed for those boards, is it just people like yourselves who've been on the pitch, who've got that first-hand experience, or are you looking for people outside the sector as well?
There's one thing I've realised, that if you want diversity of skill set, diversity of thought, there's so many talented people out there in other sectors that can come into football. I mean, I remember when I was doing the recruitment for my own board, and we brought in an external recruitment agency. And what I wanted was people externally that's got those requisite same skill sets, they've got skill sets in marketing, that's got skill sets in the corporate sector, that's got skill sets in diversity, in inclusion, across other organisations, because football's got a habit sometimes of just having people like itself. It was imperative. It was a social and a professional imperative to me, because I recognise, and most importantly, I've seen the evolution of the FA board with independence. We've got 3 women we've got a minimum of 3 women on our board, which is at the 25% under the sports governance code. And they're all outstanding. One's in business, the other one's in the legal sector. We've got people from the national game, people from the professional game, and they bring this whole rich of different thinking, thinking in a way that we can all learn from, and that's where you get a very dynamic board. That's where you get a very effective board, and you can measure the effectiveness of the work you're doing when it comes to problem solving, when it comes to challenging, when you're getting more innovative and different thinking, So I've seen how the FA board has so positively evolved, and it's going to continue to evolve, because now we've got a wonderful lady who's going to be our first chairman, female chairman. Her name's Debbie Hewitt. She starts in January. What a powerful message that's sending out to all women. You know, in this country, we've got 50% almost of the country of women. And to say that you've got a role model there in 150 odd years of the FA, you've got an outstanding, talented lady in Debbie Hewitt, who's going to be the leader of the Football Association. That's utterly fantastic. And she's capturing the embodiment of inclusion, diversity, and leadership, and setting that fabulous example that I want not just the rest of football, but the rest of other boards in other sectors to set that similar example, and also capture gender, but also capture ethnicity, capture gender diversity too, capture people with disabilities. So effectively, you're working across the whole of the other protected characteristics under the 2010 Equalities Act, under the 2010 Equality Act. So football is truly diverse, truly inclusive, and representative of the core characteristics.
Paul, thank you. That's amazing. So encouraging for anyone inside and outside football who's thinking about joining sports boards, but also boards where you've never seen anyone that looks like you. That's a big message from Paul there. Just go for it. You've got to be there. We'd love to encourage you, if you haven't yet, sign up to Dynamic Boards. We advertise around 100 different non-exec board roles across the UK every month, and it's totally free to sign up, so have a look. And if you're looking to advertise a role, please get in touch with us, because we'd love to help you make your board even more dynamic by getting the word out to the right people. So thank you so much, Paul. Great to speak to you, and I hope this is encouraging to our watchers.
Thank you.